Oh, careful. Yeah, there's
Me.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Just some homework that I did.
Nice.
Can you sit back here and see?
I can monitor it too, Dan.
Just need my notes. What did I do? I have a stack of handouts every day. All right. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is our first property care ordinance meeting that we're doing as a hybrid meeting. So we've got folks here at the Murdoch Center. We've also got folks who've logged on Teams. We've got a camera set up in the back of the room. Hopefully they can see and hear me. Why don't we start with some introductions just to test this out and just so everyone knows it is being recorded, video and audio. So we'll start here at the Murdoch Center. I'm Dan Folk. I'm the Community Development Director. Over here, Rick.
Rick Lopez with the Northern Arizona Association of Realtors.
Abel Estrella, Sunnyside Neighborhood Association and Sunnyside Resident.
Thank you, Abel. Well, let's go over here.
Hi, Jenny Neiman. I am with the Sustainability Office. I am standing in for Steve, but is out on vacation. So you got me.
Mark Brevis, Neighborhood Planner.
Jordan Hollinger, Associate Planner.
Then in the back, you can't see him on camera, but he's there.
Reggie Appleston, Code Compliance Manager.
All right. And then let's check in with our folks on Teams. I think we had 4 people there. Reggie, do you want to maybe cue them and let's see if they can introduce themselves? I think Valedia is on.
Yep.
She should just unmute herself and we
Go
should.
ahead,
Hey,
Valeria.
everyone. I'm Valeria Chase. I have a joint position between the City of Flagstaff and NAU as a neighborhood liaison.
Okay. Jill.
I'm from Coast and Mountain Properties in Flagstaff.
Thank you, Jill.
Laura.
I'm Laura Myers with La Plaza Vieja Neighborhood.
Thank you, Laura. We hear you loud and clear.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Harrington, homeowner on South Side, and yeah, just happy to be a part of this.
Thank you, Andrew.
And Celia.
Hi, I'm Celia Barretts, and I'm a homeowner very interested in this issue. So thanks for having the meeting.
Thank you, Celia. All right, so like I said, this is the first time I've actually ran a hybrid meeting and we're not at City Hall, so we've got Reggie in the back. So if you're out with us virtually and you want to have a comment, just put your hand up and I'm going to ask you to kind of monitor that and let us know when somebody has a comment or a question out in the Teams world. And similarly here in the room, we're going to stick to our agenda. There's a lot on there. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of it today, but I'm going to go over our schedule here in just a minute. So the first thing we do at all of these meetings is to review our ground rules. We've only got 3 right now. Let all participate. Turn your phone off or your volume down. If you need to take a call, we just ask that you get up and leave the room. And then our third one is to assume positive intent. So before we get started today, are there any other ground rules that anyone wants to share? I know we've got a lot of people been in a lot of public meetings. So I don't anticipate any problems, but are there any other ground rules anyone would like to add? Seeing none, anyone out in Teams world, Reggie?
Nope, see none.
Okay. We can always go back to this, but next thing I want to do is review our schedule and our meeting topics. And so we met 2 weeks ago. That was the first of 6 scheduled meetings. we've got handouts here and I sent out by email yesterday, kind of an updated meeting schedule. And then we've broken out all the different topics that we've identified as potential content for a property care ordinance. And so today we're going to try to talk about debris accumulation, hazards, equipment and vehicles, and then recycling and refuse. On June 9th, we'll be back at the Murdoch Center from 1 to 3. And again, we'll do a Teams meeting. We're going to talk about track the 23rd. That's going to be our first evening meeting. So that's going to be 5 to 7 here at Murdoch and on Teams. We're going to talk about building deterioration, abandoned and vacant buildings, vacant and undeveloped property. And then on July 14th, our plan is to talk completely about compliance, right? We often call it enforcement. Our staff, we prefer compliance, code compliance. And so we often get right into compliance, right? It's a conversation. And so we're going to try to dedicate a whole meeting to that. And if we need more time, we will. And then on July 28th, I don't have anything scheduled, but I have a feeling we're going to need that. If we don't get through topics, we'll just kind of kick it to the next meeting, and we'll see where we are. So again, all these meetings will be hybrid. We'll be in person here at Murdoch. We'll be on Teams. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the schedule? We know there's certain people are interested in certain topics, so we thought it'd be useful to try to break it out.
Celia.
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead, Celia.
Okay, thanks. So is there a place I can sign up to be able to get these documents? I just happened to come across this meeting today, so I don't have anything, but I'd like to be in the loop for the rest of this process.
Yeah, absolutely, Celia. I'll add you to our group email list.
And I can forward them right now.
Yeah.
Celia,
Okay, great.
if you put your email on the comments, I can forward it to you.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And actually, Jenny in the room offered to send it to you as well, Celia, right now. So she has the packet.
Great.
And then we're also in the process of creating a project website. I apologize, it's not up and running yet. We're going to have it up next week. And so that website will have all the same information that we've distributed. It's going to have the meeting tapes. So last meeting, we just recorded it. But we'll put up all the recordings of all these meetings as well. And so we'll continue to build that as a resource as well. And so again, just to go over why we're doing this, it was more than 2 years ago that City Council directed staff to revisit a property maintenance ordinance. There was a property maintenance ordinance brought to the City Council just about 10 years ago. It was in 2012. And it was kind of what I call an off-the-shelf PMO, right? So there are published property maintenance ordinances that International Code Council puts out. There was a lot of discussion. Essentially, council in 2012 decided not to proceed with the adoption. And so we got a request again from the League of Neighborhoods to consider this. And so that's why we're going back through this effort. The council about 2 years ago directed staff to take another run at this. And so we're finally able to be where we are. We did have discussions about, should we just take the ordinance that we had in 2012 back to council, right? That would be the easy button. Let's just try it again. And again, we met with the League of Neighborhoods last fall and at the beginning of this year. We decided, let's try to create something that's more for Flagstaff, right? Something that's focused on the issues we really want to talk about. And so rather than just being about property maintenance, what I've suggested is that this really should address things like preserving our housing stock, right? We've got a housing crisis. Trying to slow down gentrification, right? So trying to slow down this idea of removing structures and replacing them with more expensive structures that maybe aren't in people's price range. And so we do believe that this can be something that could deal with our, we also want to be thoughtful about how we seek compliance, right? And this has been a big topic. We don't want it to be a tool to force people out of their homes, right? And so one of the big topics is, you know, when we get to the issue of property versus structures, we've gotten a lot of support for rules on property maintenance. So debris, garbage, abandoned vehicles, a little less on the maintenance of buildings, right? And so maybe this just becomes a program where we're putting people in touch with resources. Last time we talked a lot about resources for folks who maybe are in a lower income. They have a situation where they just can't take care of their property. And so council has kind of agreed on this concept that along with a property care ordinance, we should have some resources available to the community, right? And so where we're standing today, it's not to be a heavy-handed tool. We want it to be something that really benefits folks. So that's just some additional background for some of you that are newer to our meeting. Any questions about where we are, where we're going? We're hoping to have a draft ordinance in September to bring to a council work session. That's our goal of this group, is to get the ordinance ready by September and potentially get it in front of this council before the election. So potentially getting it an ordinance for their consideration in October. Any questions from anyone in the room where we are? Anyone online? Rick?
You mentioned the League of Neighborhoods a couple of times. Who is this? What is this group?
So the League of Neighborhoods is the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association, Southside Neighborhood Association, and La Plaza Vieja Association. So those three neighborhood groups are officially together as the League of Neighborhoods, and they do meet. They're back to meeting regularly, I think once a month.
And I go to those meetings.
Yeah. You know, my thought is, just initially, is that an ordinance that is going to impact the entire city is being driven by three neighborhoods. What are we doing to engage these other neighborhoods to be part of this League of Neighborhoods? Because otherwise, I think there's going to be resistance, from other parts of the community when they say, well, geez, only three neighborhoods are telling the rest of us how we're supposed to live.
Right. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to grow this group here, this working group, right? And so just as of yesterday, I've got a group email of about getting close to about 60 people. And so I'm just continually adding to that group. We definitely want wider participation, right? It's just hard right now. I've sent out a lot of emails to a lot of people. Maybe we're hoping the Teams meeting will get more people involved. I think the evening meetings will be more accessible, but we definitely want a wider participation. And help us with that. That's part of this group too, is send it out to people you think are interested, right? We want wider participation because it also includes the commercial properties. And so I've just sent it to Joe Galley the other day in the chamber. And so we are kind of slowly trying to build this group up.
So
So you're-
Dan? Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Celia.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a little delay, so I apologize for interrupting there. Would you consider putting it out on the City of Flagstaff Facebook page, inviting people to participate and explaining that representation across the city is really important?
We need to do that. Yes, thank you. That was actually on my list of things to do.
Okay, because I think you'll get some shares. I think that could help.
And to get going, there's a lot going on right now, and I've kind of volunteered to be the project manager, so I will own all of this. That we've been slow to get information out. We've been slow to build this working group. I think I mentioned we're going to launch this webpage next week, which will be a repository for all this information. And we definitely need to get it up on social media. So thank you for that reminder.
Well, I guess I'm happy to be a representative for the Valley Crest neighborhood. It is a very well-defined neighborhood, albeit quite small, but people do care in the city here, in this neighborhood about these kinds of things. So if you could just add that to the list, that I'll represent this neighborhood.
Thank you so much for that. Yes.
Valeria has one, but Abel was first.
In partial response to what Rick said, I sent something out to Nextdoor and got an across the board, from county and various parts of the entire city. And so at least through this small website, part of the information's gone out.
Yeah.
Valeria?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Valeria, you're online.
Yeah, sorry, trying to get the mic. I can help with getting the information to Samantha. She's our community engagement for the city. If that's helpful. I can talk to her about it. She's in the same team as I am.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm just behind on getting in touch with her. But yeah, if you want to give her a heads up, great. And I can explain to her what we think would be good posts to put out there. And direct people are, we have it up.
Cynthia's hand still, up. That was just because she forgot to take it down.
Do you have another comment, Celia? Your hand is still up.
Oh, no, I just took it down. I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, any other questions before we get into the meat of the topics for today? One of the things we talked about last time, and I didn't put it on the agenda for this afternoon, but we did look at the title, purpose, and intent of this. And I emailed out an updated version. We did a few edits last time. And so again, I don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time on this, but this is also another important part of kind of defining what we're trying to achieve, right? And so let me just read the purpose as it stands today. So the purpose of the property care ordinance is to protect against hazardous and deteriorating conditions that negatively impact the health, safety, welfare, and quality of life in the Flagstaff, Arizona community, and to establish minimum requirements for the care of buildings and their land, and to preserve existing buildings and housing stock with sustainable practices, and to mitigate the impacts of gentrification and displacement, and with compliance consistently applied without undue hardship. The intent, this PCO shall be applied and enforced fairly, sensibly, consistently, and reasonably to promote the care of all buildings and land in the city, and where owners will be notified per a series of communications and a process provided in this chapter with sufficient time to rectify the problem with resources noted for compliance for those with economic or other challenges. And so one of the things I went back to my notes was it talked about education component. I think I need to still put that in there. That we'll try to educate folks and put them in touch with resources, right, that might be available, depending on their status. Any other kind of gut reactions to where we are right now with the purpose and intent?
Celia has her hand up also.
We'll start with Rick first, and then we'll go to Celia second. Go ahead, Rick.
You know, I realize that I'm probably one of the worst cynics when it comes to this issue, but there are two statements in here that cause me concern because of what I would consider there to be conflicting values. One has to do with preserving existing buildings and housing stock with sustainable practices. Who determines what sustainable practices are? Is that policy directives, regulatory directives from the city? Is it strictly coming from the sustainability department, or is it going to be a code enforcement officer that's going to be determining these things? And then the second is with compliance consistently applied without undue hardship. How do we determine what undue hardship is? And my example is a landlord who is relatively well off and can afford to do things, but because he's now required to, passes those on to tenants that are less able to afford rents. And what does that do to landlords who then decide, boy, I guess I'm just going to sell my property and move on? You know, so those two things in my mind create some conflicting values that, and I don't know whether this is the right, I'm sure there's going to be an expansion of this down the road, and maybe we put those things into however we expand the purpose there. But I just want it to be upfront that I have some real concerns about those two things.
Yeah. And that was actually one of the comments from last time, is defining undue hardship. And that's something we could define, try to explain better in this purpose statement, or we could have there'll be a definition section of this. I guess in my mind, the reason we're putting in this undue hardship is because, again, we don't want it to become a tool that's kind of weaponized to try to force people out of their homes, right? Through a series of liens or whatever. So I think undue hardship in my mind is, yeah, considering what are their means, what resources are available to them. I'd be curious to get Reggie's input on this because he deals with it now. I think our code compliance is one of understanding the situation and the capability of a household to take care of the issue, right?
Mhm.
So those are kind of my thoughts just to kick off the discussion. The sustainability practice, again, that's a huge topic. Some of it is in our code, some of it'll be things that we're requiring through our codes. I think we're just trying to link all different issues together, right? The idea of housing and sustainability and how do we try to impact, our housing stock and opportunities for people to live. I know you just had your hand up and I forget your name. I know.
John.
John, we met you last time. Thank you, John.
So my thought, going off of some of them that was just provided is, I think we need to look in general, at broader as owners. It shouldn't matter if it's owned by an individual person or it's owned by a landlord. Across the board, we're talking about ownership of the property. And that's where I kind of think as a whole, that's what we need to look at, is the ownership of the property, because the landlord is just as responsible. The tenant issue is a separate issue. It's just legal control.
And ultimately, that's who's responsible is the property owner.
Yeah.
Just hold on a second, Jenny. Did Celia have a comment? Let's go to Celia and then we'll get back to our room here. Go ahead, Celia.
Sure. Couple of things. I agree with Rick about with his two comments, and I am wondering about whether it might make more sense to use the word including sustainable practices. I worry that it could be interpreted that if something is not considered sustainable, then we can't preserve the building we can't preserve the building. So yeah, I just think that we shouldn't limit ourselves to only sustainable practices, because not every situation that won't work in every situation. So to provide a little more flexibility, but to say that sustainable practices are important, I guess, is one way to look at that. And then the other is, I wonder about the purpose, the first paragraph, if there's a way to frame it so that it's actually more in the positive instead of the negative, if you know where I'm going. In other words, to protect against, I wonder if we can say say it in the affirmative. And I'm happy to write some language and just send it to you do some wordsmithing to see if anyone is interested in how to reframe it. So that's one offer there. And then the other is at the bottom, instead of using the word noted in the very last paragraph, I would perhaps say resources provided. I'm not sure what it means to say resources are noted.
Yeah, thank you for all that. And yeah, if you want to send some language, that would be great.
Okay.
So I think at the beginning it is like an alternative is rather than to say the purpose of the PCO is to protect against, maybe it's the purpose of the PCO is to promote and then list what we're trying to promote.
That's where I'm
ensure.
going. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to send those, that would be great, Celia.
Okay, thanks.
So then I've captured all of it. And we can expand on this idea of how are we preserving buildings and housing stock? It's not just through sustainable practices, but maybe what I'm hearing is we need to expand on how we achieve that.
Right.
Did you have some comments?
Yeah, I just want to respond. I think it's a really good point, right? What does sustainable practices mean? I want to say here that this is high level language, right? And I think that sustainable practices was actually probably inserted in here because we know that preserving existing housing stock is sustainable in itself, right? Not always, but most of the time, the building that's there, right? There's a lot of embedded energy, right? In those bricks and that wood and that siding, right? So I think I just want to say, like, this isn't us, right? I think this is really meant in a high level intent. It's really sustainable to use existing buildings, right? We want to use our incredible older housing stock, right? That's 100 years old and was really well built. That is sustainable in itself. So I think I'd be really comfortable if we move around that word sustainable in a little ways. I think that was the intent. I don't think anyone's intending to say you can only do these certain things to preserve a house.
Absolutely. It's not meant to be limiting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's meant to be kind of just touching on what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I do want to say that I completely agree with that. So I would actually take out sustainable practices because I don't think that the way it's written now, I don't think that that's actually what it conveys. I think we're not exactly saying that, in my opinion. So I think the ideas, as I understand, is very broad here under the purpose of the ordinance. I think preservation of existing building and housing stock is fine. And that you're saying that that is a sustainable practice. That is the most sustainable thing we can do. Does that make sense? The sustainable practices, I think, throws us off the way it's used in this particular sentence.
Thank you for that input. Rick, did you have another comment?
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. You know, one of the concerns that most homeowners, particularly homeowners in these older neighborhoods, their biggest fear in the city becoming involved in their house is the possibility that the city is going to come in and impose all kinds of regulatory requirements, permits that they have to get, and on and on and on. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people right now do not update their houses, because they don't want to go to the city to apply for a permit because they know what that's going to lead to. And they're just scared to death. Oh God, if I ask for a permit here, the city's going to require this, and this, and this, and this before we know it. So I'm just not going to do it. And I think that anything that we do with this ordinance, any language that we use, it has to somehow remove or reduce that fear that people have that once the city's involved, oh my God, it's going to cost me $1 gazillion to replace a window. You know, well, we don't want, I don't think in this property maintenance ordinance that we want to create more fear than what's already out there.
Did you have a comment, Abel?
Completely different thought, but related to this was that absolutely very few of the people that I talked to over the last basically month talk about sustainable housing. Zip, zero, none. It's about yards. It's about how the house looks, even though, you know, that if it's got a big bow, and then we talked a little bit about this, they're talking about that. Not talking about some, you know, the sustainable housing for Flagstaff, not a bit. And I just want to throw it out there because they're not talking about it. It could be that the survey, it came up during the survey, and I haven't read it completely. But talking to the people, it's at least the people that.
No, I would say our early input through the survey we did and these discussions is that there's definitely, I think, more support for regulations on the condition of the yard, right? And the exterior outside of the building. But yet again, kind of more mixed input on the structure itself, right? Like, do we really want to get into the issue of peeling paint? I think there is consensus. It feels like if it's a dangerous building, right, which is covered under our current codes. And I'm going to segue into that as we're going to start introducing what our current code says on these topics, right? Because a lot of these issues are in our city code. They're just not all in the same place, right? They don't necessarily work well together. But for example, our building code does address unsafe buildings, right? If a roof is sagging and it's in danger of collapsing, we can go out and inspect it and, you know, require the appropriate repairs or determine if it's habitable. But then when you get into the maintenance issue, there's less support, I would say, for things like, you know, peeling paint. I don't know, what's another example? Broken window, non-functioning window. So anything else on the purpose and intent? We'll continue to work on this and maybe revisit it at the beginning of each meeting. Celia, do you have another comment before we get into our next topic?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe it wouldn't be worth having some sort of general intent provision right after the title or before the title. In other words, that's more of a narrative paragraph that really can explore what the city is trying to achieve and what it's not trying to do through this ordinance. It's hard to put that into the purpose section. It's kind of like the legislative history. And given how difficult this issue is and could conceivably become again, because I was on council in 12 when this came up and then it went away. I feel like if we can explain the intent more clearly, it may help people to see that the city is not trying to do certain things that they might be afraid of. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And some of the things that Rick said, I think are really important for the community to understand and for the city to understand, and to sort of there to be some more explicit language about what the city's objectives are. Because I do think it's easy for the public to kind of go to the worst case scenario and be afraid that the city is going to come in and do all these things, and maybe being a little more clear about what the city is trying to achieve could be helpful.
We'll continue to work on that and strengthen it.
And the narrative doesn't have to be legal language. The narrative is just, here's what the city's trying to do through a property care ordinance, and here's where we're trying to go with this, but here's where we're not trying to go with this. And then when you read the purpose section, you have a better understanding of where the city's coming from.
Yep, thank you for those comments.
Okay.
All right, let's get into this first topic for today, which is the debris accumulation standards. Just gonna grab a handout here. So last time we went over this, it's another handout we provided and it's been emailed out to everybody. It's the 10 areas that we're proposing would be sections within a property care ordinance. And so the first one was on debris accumulation. And one of the things I prepared for today, and we'll get this up on the website so everyone can just look at it, is I've started to capture sections of our city code. So the city code is, forget how many chapters are in it. 10 is the zoning code, but there's chapter 6 is the police powers essentially. Chapter 7 is on health and sanitation. So it's got rules on solid waste. And so in chapter 6, which is again, the police, I call them the police powers, but there's a whole section on littering, right? So this first one on debris accumulation, I think this is one of the sections that I'm looking at Reggie uses to help deal with complaints about accumulation of garbage and debris and littering. And so one of the challenges of what we're going through is looking at what's currently in the city code. And do we need to alter that? Do we need to just wrap it into the PCO? Reggie's brought up a really good point, which is we probably don't necessarily want to take these out of chapter 6 because this is what empowers the police officers to address some of these issues, right? Some of them do get passed on to Reggie, but there's a lot in here on littering. So I don't expect you to have read this. It's something to take with you. There are sections in here on, what is littering, an unauthorized accumulation of litter on private property. Littering is prohibited in alleys and sidewalks, so that's dealing with public right of way. There's a section on uninhabited or vacant private property. And then it goes through a bunch of other different examples. Then it's got a whole bunch of stuff on enforcement and violations. And so again, this is some more background as to what we have today on littering. And it's kind of a segue into this first discussion on debris accumulation. And so Mark has prepared another handout. A worksheet. A worksheet. Do you want to talk about the worksheet, Mark? I'll shut up for a while.
No.
And then how we use it and how we want to use it as we go through this process.
You find the worksheet here. So I'm Mark Revis. I am neighborhood planner and also, I will admit, heritage preservation officer. She gave my speech. So, I do hug buildings, but we do know that we're in a growing community with housing needs. So I'm asking you to fill in some guidelines if I've missed them. I have found success in this approach of doing title, standard, and guidelines. So even us in government get tired of reading government speak. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. So The title here is debris accumulation. I'll read what the standard is. Removal of excess of accumulation of material that presents a health and safety issue, such as harboring pests, fire danger, and deteriorating discarded materials. So that's that giant sentence that you refer back to. I've just produced, hopefully, some guidelines, 3 guidelines here. Deteriorating litter from the property that consists of discarded paper, plastic, metal, and similar debris that presents a health and safety issue to the property and adjacent properties. Piles of solid material that are harboring insects, rodents, and other pests impacting the property and adjacent property. Dry materials such as grass, branches, and other combustible material that present a fire danger to the property and adjacent properties. That's all I could really think of in a simplified form. Even if you don't have all those guidelines available, you can think about and go back to that standard again. Did you, when Reggie came up and said, please, this seems to be an issue, can you go back to that standard and say, did you remove the excess accumulation of material that presents a health and safety issue, such as harboring pests, fire danger, and deteriorating discarded materials? So you can keep writing guidelines to the end of your life and you will never cover everything. So that's an approach I have found successful in neighborhood planning and in historic preservation. So if you have any more guidelines that you would like to fill in, at least 2, that would be great.
It kind of covers it, you know, part of what you said covers it, but I'm gonna be more specific. Discarded furniture and beds, that's kind of specific. You know, now yours is in here as part of that. But I'm being more specific, you know, this discarded furniture and beds that are sitting on people's property.
He gets the call all the time. Great.
Yeah, I would just second that. That's something that we see in the South Side just all the time. So thank you for bringing that up.
We can explain that further, why it exists and
I said beds, it's mattresses.
mattresses, yeah. Is there something else that jumps out on this? Jenny?
Mark, I just want to ask, you know, so it says piles of solid materials and then it says dry materials. And it seems like for dry materials, we're talking dry organic materials. Just wondering if clarification would help.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the point about beds, right? Like solid materials, it seems, and furniture, right? Like I'm just wondering if more clarification would be more powerful there.
Yeah.
I just want to add for the furniture and mattresses and things like that. Years ago, solid waste would pick them up during bulk pickup.
Mm.
They've gotten over the years to the point where they are phasing out from removing those themselves during bulk because of when it's in the weather, they become heavier. So a mattress, instead of being 25 pounds, might all of a sudden become 75 pounds. And if they don't have the amount of staff to lift it, or one gets injured, they don't have that big piece of equipment to use to lift it, which is why they're phasing out. And so their idea is that people brought it to the property, they can take it to the landfill. That's not always realistic, we know.
Whose team, please?
Right.
Fix it up.
So that's one of the things, so that's why you see them sometimes out, because the residents and the tenants expect the city to remove them. And yet, sometimes bulk pickup during those times will just pass by and then call me.
That was going to be my next question, Reggie. So how does that play out? Does solid waste contact you about it and then you have to go talk to the owner?
They do. We either talk to the owner, or if they don't have the ability, truck, rental truck, whatever, to remove it, we offer the service where we have a trailer. Sometimes I have a couple of guys are pretty good size on staff, we're able to lift things. And we'll remove it, or we'll call solid waste and they will come pick it up at that point, but then it'll be a charge to the property owner.
Which gets into funding for all of this. So if you would write down any idea you have on this and turn it into me at the end of the game, we'll go over a couple, whatever else we can get to. So
Laura has,
Thanks.
has her hand
Oh,
up.
sure.
Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, this is a problem. I mean, I realize that you probably don't have some of the staff at the time you need it, but a lot of the students will just throw it on the corner, so it might not even be that homeowner's garbage or couches. So I'm wondering if that has to be excluded from bulk pickup, because I think that that's the majority of what people put out for bulk pickup.
So I can speak a little bit to our bulk pickup program. I am from sustainability, but we work very closely with solid waste. Our bulk pickup program is deeply unsustainable. We had someone out in the community called it the gold standard bulk pickup program, right? Our bulk pickup program is much, much, much more generous and takes many, many more things than any other community that we've looked into. It is not sustainable from a revenue perspective. Our solid waste program is revenue neutral, right? They pay for it with the fees they get. And it is not a program that can do more, and it is likely that in the future the program will be doing less. Because again, it takes way too many man hours that we get. It is a free service, right? It is a free pickup service to keep you from going to the landfill, right? It takes up to the landfill. So I know I was going to mention this anyways, but the reality is that our bulk pickup service will do less in the future as opposed to doing more. Again, it's just not a financially sustainable practice that we have right now, and it is not mirrored in any other local government that we have looked across.
Okay, well then I think that the public needs to be educated about it then, because people think that it will happen. So maybe notices need to go out, I don't know, and let people know that, this isn't happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, we know we need to do a lot better communicating of what goes in bulk pickup and what doesn't, because we see it out there. I'm sure you all see it in your neighborhoods, right? People put stuff out there and thinking they're just going to get a fridge picked up, right? And you're not. That's on us to do.
So do you, Reggie, do we have materials that you share with property owners about the program? Like what gets picked up and what doesn't?
Well, we do. We provide the bulk pickup schedule, and it tells exactly what will be picked up and what won't be picked up. It's not quite as clear as maybe it could be, but that's something that solid waste could probably work on. We also could probably work on trying to get some type of educational material, put together to present to the community at different times.
One of the ladies, I know we're talking about problems, but she came up with a solution about putting those big, every once in a while, the big dumpsters in the neighborhood. And so they could go dump in that, get enough to dump it there. She said they tried it wherever she came from.
I know we've done it a few times, the few weeks around the end of the semester at NAU, we've provided dumpsters in the south side, I think. I don't know what the status is, when the last time we did that organized. Again, it's just a matter of funding and organizing it. And I know when those dumpsters show up, they get filled up pretty quickly.
Yes.
And then someone's got to pay to haul it off, which is the city, I'm assuming. But Reggie, we've done that in the past, so we tried it consistently.
Yeah, we've done it numerous times over the years. We do get different neighborhoods. If they want to do it like a weekend community cleanup or a week community cleanup, especially during move out, we will help provide a roll-up dumpster placed in a strategic place where it's easy for people to get to. And then, they'll do a little cookout or something, so it's a fun experience, and it's something that does clean up the neighborhoods. Unfortunately, with COVID, we really didn't do any of those in the past couple of years.
I think this lady was suggesting on a somewhat regular basis. And I mean, flag is really spread out, so that would be a difficult one. But it's her suggestion.
This came up last time too, is that one of the outcomes of this could be having these neighborhood cleanup days, right? Where somehow we organize just an organized cleanup of a particular geographic part of the community. And doing those on a regular basis.
And we've been successful on occasions. I know Laura could probably speak to it, as well. We've done a numerous amount of those in La Plaza Vieja over the years. Like I said, we didn't
Yes.
do any the past couple of years, but those are something that are fun experiences. It brings the community together. I know Laura was one that helped organize those over in La Plaza Vieja. So we're definitely on board with trying to rekindle that. And again, we can provide the roll-off dumpster and get it hauled off. Maybe even provide 2 for different types of materials, which we've done in the past. So again, those are the circumstances where the city takes puts the bill, so to speak. And obviously, we don't have a huge budget, but for projects like that, I can always find a way to make it work.
And Jenny, I think his sustainability, some neighborhood cleanups as well, haven't they?
So, and Valeria might have been starting to speak to it, but the move out day cleanups have been a partnership with Valeria's team, Reggie, and sustainability. And those are done at the end of every year. I know, donations here, trash here, and this is in response to these exact issues. We sponsor the community stewards program that does cleanups pretty much every day of the year, right? But those are volunteer run. We do cleanups in certain areas, but those are only a couple times a year. But certainly a related thing and could be really related, right? Do we go neighborhood by neighborhood, try to organize with those? I think that this is really related to actually what Rick brought up at the beginning of, the League of Neighborhoods versus, neighborhood organization can be a challenge sometimes, right? Outside of the 3 formally organized neighborhoods. And so I just want to put a pin in that because I think that will be really necessary to have these conversations about neighborhood cleanups, right? Because we need those neighborhood leaders. So really just a thanks to all of the residents here because y'all are it.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of follow up on that. I think that somehow it needs to be a more concerted effort to try to organize various neighborhoods. And I'll just give you an example of Continental. Just to organize a program for people to rake their pine needles in their yards.
Right.
If the city provided dumpsters every 2 or 3 blocks where people could rake up their pine needles and go take them and dump them in the dumpster, and the city would then haul them away rather than having them all pile them up in front of their yards and waiting for somebody to come and get them, type of thing. I think that there's receptiveness in various neighborhoods depending on what the issues are. Some neighborhoods may have a big challenge with people leaving debris and junk and stuff in their yards, and others just have issues with just yard cleanup, pine needles, leaves, that kind of thing. But I think that, there could be a more concerted effort between the city and these different neighborhoods to organize various types of cleanup activities within their areas on a, biannual basis or something. There's a way of, I think, of doing that.
So one of the things I heard through these comments is we've got the 3 bullets that Mark introduced, and we do have good examples, I think, with bullet 1 and bullet 3. Bullet 1 talks about discarded paper, plastic, metal. Bullet 3 talks about the organic materials, grass, branches. So what I heard was maybe we need to add some examples for what are piles of solid materials, right? So it could be furniture, it could be mattresses.
Mhm.
I think Valeria still wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Valeria.
So I just wanted to share the last time we did the roll-off bin at Plaza Vieja was at about 2017. I wasn't in my role at that time, but that's just what I heard from sustainability or from Dylan when he was there. But the challenge was with that is that if the roll-off bin is not staffed, we will get a lot of waste that we don't accept. And then it's up to the city's responsibility to get rid of it appropriately. But things like tires and old box TVs, things like that. So if, that option is considered, we will also need to consider having it staffed during the time that it's out there so that we don't get waste that then we're responsible, the city's responsible to dispose of properly.
One of the things we've done in the past in those types of situations is we've provided two or three different roll-offs for specific types of items. And but the suggestion of having it staffed is very appropriate because even though we had them designated for certain things, there was always some of those inappropriate things placed in those. So that's a challenge, but that's something that we can, I think, rekindle. We can find a way to staff it during those events. I think it'd be very successful. But yeah, I definitely would be willing to help provide, multiple roll-offs.
Yeah, I'm guessing we're getting a lot of hazardous materials mixed in, so paint, electronics, things that we wouldn't put in the landfill, right?
It used to be that the city used to have a program where they would have a hazardous material drop off in front of City Hall in the parking lot.
Did one not long ago at the PD, I'm looking at.
We do it a
Jenny,
couple
'cause
times a
it takes
year,
sustainability.
at the police department. Yep, for hazardous materials so that you don't have to go all the way out there.
Yeah, okay.
You can bring your paint and
Yep.
electronics and.
Because I think that is, people get lazy and they don't want to have to load everything up and take it all the way up to the landfill. And then there's certain days that it's open and other days that it's not. And, it's too hard to keep track of. But, these in-town events, where you have a central location, even providing, I know the Association for Realtors down in Phoenix provides a program where you can go and take all your old files and they'll collect them, and take them to the company that shreds them all for you.
Drop off day
Yeah,
too.
drop off dates and
Mhm.
stuff. And those kinds of things are very helpful because people just don't want to have to go all the way out to the landfill.
I think you could bring, was it one box of paper or two to shred? There was like.
It's a lot. It's a good amount.
You could bring quite a bit.
You could take a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Drugs.
Got something?
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when we do it at Plaza Vieja, we usually have, so we don't have to have a staff person there. One of us will stay with the bin to make sure, during the hours that we're dumping, that people aren't coming and dumping, debris that shouldn't be there. Because I know it's a drain on funding, so.
All right. So this was our first topic here, debris accumulation. Anything else on this one? I think we need to maybe do a little more specificity is what I'm hearing. But I feel in general, maybe we are capturing these big categories.
Yep.
Do we want to move on then to hazards, which is a good segue because we were just talking about the hazardous waste program.
Mhm.
You want to talk about hazards, Mark?
Back to title standard guidelines. So title is hazards. The standard is eliminate hazards present on and encroaching from the property that may cause harm to the owner, tenant, visitor, service delivery person, or the public. I don't know if we need that many people, but to kind of point things out. Guidelines. Repair or remove and properly dispose of sharp and jagged objects from property access points and routes and yard areas that may cause harm to persons that access and utilize the property. Rectify loose objects that may fall or present a tripping hazard to persons that access the property. Resolve all conditions that present a hazard that encroaches into the public right-of-way or a neighboring property. Could be worded better, but it's a good attempt at this point.
I'll put you on the spot, Mark. Do you have examples for some of these?
I would say, like a pile of wood that's splintered, that's laying over somewhere, tripping on it. I don't know if we want to include toys, but again, something that would actually cause a lot of harm. So any kind of sharp object, anything that would cause a trip and a fall, anything that encroaches, into a neighboring property or public right of way. I don't know if we're including, trees on this one, but,
Or might that be included?
it could be. If you,
I,
but that it does it, people will avoid and they'll hit the sidewalk, they'll go out in the street, they'll do whatever. So, we worry about dictating landscape. That's a tough one.
What about things like sidewalks that are heaved and it can easily be tripping hazards, as you're walking down the street?
So one of the things that I think one of the challenges on this one, and I'll just ask for some clarification, is are we talking about hazards on private property or hazards in the right of way? So things like sidewalks, encroachments of sidewalks, typically that's covered on our right of way, which is a whole other section. And that definitely, we have provisions on that. You can't block sidewalks. We have a whole section.
That's under Title 8.
Title 8, we have a whole section that, sidewalks are actually the responsibility of the adjacent owner, even though it's in the right of way. And so we can require a sidewalk to be repaired that's heaving. We also have a program, we get a little bit of money every year to share the cost. So Scott Overton, our Public Works Director, they get a little bit of money every year, and sometimes they can split the cost with an owner to repair the sidewalk because it's not inexpensive. So we do currently have that language. I didn't include it today because it was right away.
Right.
But, so maybe this is a clarification for Mark. Was your intention that this is on private property?
On the property either presenting a hazard when people typically access it, like up the sidewalk to the front door, or that there have something somewhere, the chimney's gonna fall off the house.
Well, it does say,
crush the neighbors.
it does say resolve all conditions that present a hazard that encroaches into the public right of way. So you could include sidewalks in there because that's in the right of way. And if it's a tripping hazard.
I mean, do we care about tripping hazards on someone's private property? That's a pretty low bar. A rock can be a tripping hazard. Firewood? Are we gonna regulate firewood? I don't know if I like Mark's example. I'm just gonna stir the pot here. Because we need to be realistic about what we're talking about.
Sure.
To me, when I read hazards, I thought more about like oil and paint and gas cans, right? You'll get a call about a barrel that
Broken
looks to be
glass.
leaking something, or
I'm all for that.
Broken glass.
broken glass would be a good example, I guess.
Yeah.
I know we struggle with things like firewood. Like, people have a right to have firewood, but is it neatly stacked? Is it creating a fire hazard? I mean, Reggie, do you want to talk a little bit about your challenges on that one, or? I know I'm opening a can of worms here, but I don't know if I like this idea of tripping hazards.
Pass on that, right? For the moment, just for sake of time.
Right. This is a hard section, I think.
Definition. It's pretty simple. Be danger or risk. Finding that better, figuring out what's important to people.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between a tripping hazard on the private property and a tripping hazard on the right of way. Because if it's on the right of way, that's a public space. Whereas on the private property, well, the public really doesn't have any right to go there. It's just people who have a reason to be there.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
So sidewalks are a priority for us, keeping them clear for everybody. ADA access, kids, older folks, middle-aged folks like myself. So we do put a lot of time and effort into sidewalks. When you look at our monthly report, overgrown brush, snow, cinders, tripping hazards. So
the focus would be if that property, the private property, causes a safety issue on adjacent property or on right of way, is what I'm
Yes.
kind of getting. Very helpful.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. Got anything to write down on it?
Mm-hmm.
That's better than my word. That would be great.
what else on this topic? Do we have any questions from folks on our Teams meeting? Comments?
And one of the other things that I wanted to think about in terms of hazards, because I know this came up in regards to the Arrowhead Village, the manufactured homes in there. A lot of the manufactured homes could be deemed to be hazardous just because they're so old. And, you have aluminum wiring, you have all kinds of issues that could be considered hazardous. So where do we go with that?
I think those are, I think would be covered under the building code. And I mean, there's only so much we can all bring together, but the building code addresses life safety issues and is a unit habitable, right? So there's some basic standards in the housing code about running water, hot and cold, facilities for cooking and, restrooms.
Electrical.
Things like electrical wiring and all this, I think is it mainly the housing code, Reggie, would you say?
Yeah, that's more in the building code, the structure.
Or the building code.
of the, the minimum standards of a safe structure. So, I mean, that's all addressed under Title IV, which is the building code.
I think I gave an example a couple of weeks ago where we had a case where, I think it was probably Reggie who was out there and our building inspection team went out and looked at it was basically an illegal unit, a shed that had been converted to an ADU, let's call it. They had wastewater running it right onto there was a pipe coming out of it onto the yard. There was extension cords from the house to this that were providing power. Just, it didn't meet the minimum housing code. And so we posted non-habitable, right? Somebody shouldn't be living here. So we do have those situations and then it's not habitable until they get the permits and bring it up to our minimum standard for housing.
Mhm.
What about the hazardous materials, Reggie? Is that covered in the solid waste code? Things like paint and oil and things?
Yeah, it's in a couple of different places. It's in the health and sanitation, also stormwater, wastewater. Couple of different areas.
I mean, is this something we should just leave there? Should it really be part of a property care ordinance? Other than like an oil drum that's sitting and leaking, that's a pretty obvious violation.
Mm-hmm.
But
It might be able to be covered unified
yeah.
somewhere.
So I think we have some work to do on this one.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on hazards? Do you want to move on to equipment and vehicles?
Yep.
Just as an introduction, so we have quite a bit on this one in our code. So chapter 6, I'll let Mark speak here in a minute, but I'm just going to do an introduction on this one, equipment and vehicles, so inoperable equipment and vehicles. Chapter 6 of our city code, which is again the police section, has a section on abandoned vehicles. And so it gets into junked vehicle and abandoned. My kind of layman's definition or explanation is an abandoned vehicle is really tied to licensing, right? So does it have a license plate? Is it registered? If it's not registered, I think we can say it's abandoned. A junked would be an inoperable vehicle, right? So it doesn't, you can't drive it, it's inoperable. Doesn't have an engine, whatever the case may be. So this section talks about having an abandoned or junked vehicle. And then we also have a section in the zoning code, chapter 10, which I provided. And there's a section on storage of unregistered or inoperable motor vehicles. And so it does say no more than one unregistered or inoperable motor vehicle shall be stored on a residentially zoned lot or parcel. No such unregistered or inoperable vehicle shall be stored within the front setback. So chapter 10 says you can have one unlicensed, no license plate, or inoperable vehicle, but you basically got to keep it out of the front setback. So it can't be in the front yard, can't be in the driveway probably. Could be in a garage, could be in a side yard. And then this section, again, they don't really work well together is what I'm trying to get at. I think, again, section 6, but we do have existing rules about these types of vehicles. So again, this is one where I think we need to kind of bring it together and unify it. So there's my introduction.
That's a good one. Equipment and vehicles, standard that I've conceived here, is removal of inoperable equipment and vehicles. Remove inoperable items from the property that is visible from the street or adjacent properties. That's kind of getting into that, it really bothers me world a little bit. So,
Yeah, this notion of adjacent properties. So if you have a two-story house and from the upstairs window, you can look into the backyard and there's an inoperable vehicle that's up on blocks and stuff that's stored there. Would that qualify?
we should definitely clarify.
I think typically
This
we're
gives-
talking about visibility from the right of way, typically. So from a public location, right? Can you see it from the street?
Well, and
I
I,
could strike that.
but
Adjacent vehicles.
yeah, it does say from the street or adjacent properties. So I think the adjacent properties needs to be clarified, what we mean by that.
And that's responding a little bit to people wanting, what's art and what isn't type of thing, and that it will bother people, the neighbors. So whether we include that or whether we just take a bigger public approach to that, I think is a valid point.
Yeah, and also, even visible from the street. I mean, if you have a property that is not fenced in, so the entire backyard is visible from the street, or at least a good portion of the backyard is visible from the street, and you have an inoperable vehicle back there that's been there for years, again, does that qualify under this ordinance?
My thought, and maybe that's defining that
Yeah.
extent.
Right,
My thought was, when I talk architectural, the facade, the primary facade, secondary facade, so
Sure.
what's that
yeah,
level? Not, you got a point there that it could be considered the entire property, because you could see it,
sure.
and people could call and,
Just real quick, don't we have, isn't that defined? We have front setback, like we actually have areas of the property defined, and if we're talking front yard, can't we just say front setback? That's already a definition that we use, right?
good one.
Cause then that gets past that, right?
Sure.
If you're on a corner lot.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And that's defined though. If you're on a corner lot, even if you have the whole block, right? We have a defined space that is your front setback. So that might solve that problem.
Good one. I also tossed in there non-motorized vehicles, inoperable equipment, inoperable appliances. We have another section called attractive nuisance that doesn't sound, nuisance doesn't sound that intense, but, the classic refrigerator or, where somebody could get hurt, is what's kind of there. So some of this could be left in police requirements. Some of it could potentially be absorbed into another section. So I will take your input on that. If you have concepts on it. I like the front setback a lot, that at least.
Yeah,
And another question that was up on this when I actually got it through email was about repair of vehicles, right? So do we allow a vehicle that's inoperable to be in someone's driveway and being repaired in a single family neighborhood? I think the answer is yes, we do allow for repairs. It was pointed out to me, I'm gonna look at Jenny again, it was pointed out to me in this email that, our sustainability program has a whole thing about fix-it clinics and, we want things to be repaired, not disposed of, right?
True.
All kinds of things. And so this includes vehicles. And so we do allow vehicle repair
Yes,
on residential properties. I do some looking for confirmation.
Yes.
We do.
we do.
yeah. Is there a time limit? I mean, somebody could be repairing their car for months and months and months.
Years.
Years.
And restoration of a classic vehicle. I
Right?
think state statute actually protects, there's a section in here about certain vehicles are exempt. Horseless carriages, classic cars, historic cars, street rods as defined in ARS, Arizona state revised statutes.
Yeah.
But there's a 15-day thing. And so I think the intent is you're doing something at least every 15 days to progress the repair. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's a hard one.
What did you do in the last 15 days?
Yeah.
Oh, I took this lug nut off.
Waited for the part.
Yeah.
I've been waiting on the part.
Yeah, it's,
So,
it's
so
in today's world, that could be an
Title
issue.
VI really, when you utilize that one, it's when you have a junk scrap vehicle or something of that nature that you know is never gonna be repaired or moved. You know it's been there for quite some time. Those are the ones where we can give them the 15-day time frame to
Mhm.
either do something about fixing it or remove it.
Yeah,
We
okay.
can help get it removed. So we do have a program where if we see there's been a vehicle that's been there for years, we know if roots, if stumps are starting to grow up into the vehicle, we know it's not going anywhere. We have a program for private property owners where we can offer that assistance to remove it for them at no cost to them.
Yeah, okay.
So, but yeah, that's a kind of a tough one, because again, with Title 10, and it says you can have one inoperable vehicle, I always get told, well, I plan to fix it.
Of course.
Mañana's a good word.
Go ahead, John, your question?
Does this apply to commercial as well? So in instances where we have commercial buildings in town that have old equipment that hasn't moved in years, that's still sitting on their lot, though it's behind a fence, this would apply to them as well.
Part of me wants to say yes, but the other part says no, because they can actually store as, what do they call it? An incidental use.
So it kind of depends on the zoning, right?
Depends on the zoning and depends on the type of business it might have been. So that's a difficult one as well.
Some zones allow outdoor storage of vehicles. Sometimes it requires screening, so like a fence.
Screening.
Think of obviously a garage, a repair shop is an allowed use in
I-
commercial zone.
An instance I'm thinking about over in Loma Vista on the other side of town, you've got homes on one side of the street that back up, right, Loma Vista and Park. And you've got a tire shop that's got old vehicles and a dealership right in front. So if you own the property on the Loma Vista side, that's what you're seeing,
Yeah.
are the old tires and all of that, and the old vehicles that are just junked and not moving. So that's why I'm asking,
Yeah.
would this apply to that situation where, the old tires and debris needs to be removed, or can it just sit there forever?
I would say as long as it's allowed in the zone and it's meeting the standard for that use. So some uses have standards like screening. So again, I guess the answer is kind of, it depends, right? It depends on the zoning, what the use is. Are they meeting a standard? Is that a fair answer, Reggie?
Yes, it's still a little gray, and we're trying to get clarification on that. Because when we start demanding that things be removed, again, people will always have a reason why they need to keep it or want to keep it, and then it becomes a legal process. And so we've never really had or been pushed to where we've had to go to court for a situation like that. So yeah, it's great, but I know there's a lot of those types of situations around town, and we're trying to figure out the best way to approach it. What I've always done, even with commercial, our program technically isn't supposed to give a business owner the opportunity for us to take the removal of a vehicle from their property. But if we feel it's something that would benefit the community, we'll still offer that service. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they say, well, no, I want to keep it. So our program will hopefully continue to morph over the years and best meet the standards of the community.
Thank you.
Valeria asked the question, she said she knows exactly what you're talking about.
Did you have a comment, Valeria?
She was just saying she knows exactly where he's talking about. I do too.
Yeah, no, it's a condition you see around town, right? Where one side of the street might be residential, the other is commercial. What about this idea of allowing, one inoperable vehicle on a single family lot? Does that trouble anybody? Should it be just in your driveway? Should it be out of view?
My own perspective, you open up a can of worms when you allow one inoperable vehicle to be on the property, because that can be a significant eyesore to anybody in the neighborhood. I think it should be in an enclosed area if they want to keep it in their garage, or they have a separate facility in their backyard where they can keep it out of the public view, or it's in a fenced-in area in their backyard, that's probably okay. But if it's visible from the front, in the front setback, as we've been talking about,
Yeah.
I don't think they should be allowed to have one inoperable vehicle.
So the current language is, yeah, no such unregistered or inoperable vehicle shall be stored within the front setback. So as long as it's behind the face of the house, let's just assume the house is at the setback. You know, it could still be visible, but it's behind, you know, it could be in a side yard, let's say.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be allowed right now.
Yeah. And I suppose that's okay, but,
Yeah, and even in situations like that, it's still visible.
Yeah.
But, and so what we've done in the past, not always successful, but we've asked people, well, can you at least put a car cover or something on it?
right.
So that, you know, you don't see the hood that's taken off and the, you know, engine exposed or parts here. And we've been successful on occasion, and then other times, not.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that topic of the vehicle and whether it's operable or not? Kind of what we allow now, do we need to just maintain that standard? Do you think it needs to be tightened up?
I think we should maintain. And get there again, I'm a proponent of classic cars. So I have a 67 Camaro that I've been working on, and, you know, it's beautiful, it's black, it's sitting in the front, and I'll, flip up the hood to work on it, but it sits in the driveway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I had a 65 Mustang Fastback. It sits in my front driveway.
Yeah.
Or was sitting in my front driveway. And just would work on it, and it was years.
I mean, I feel like this is probably why people buy property. Is so that they have a place for their vehicles.
Yeah.
And some may be operating, some may be ones they're working on, right? I feel like driveways are meant to park vehicles in. I find it odd that we don't allow campers and RVs. This is another topic, but. Do we have an online comment?
Celia has a comment.
Go ahead, Celia.
Hi there. So I was just wondering from a compliance standpoint, does the city get a lot of inquiries about the issue of the parked cars versus the RVs and the campers, et cetera?
Yes, we continue to get those types of calls, and we do address them.
Well, so what exactly are people complaining about? Are they complaining about situations that are not, they don't understand the code and so it's actually compliant, or are they reporting things that are not compliant with the current code?
Both. Yeah, we get both of those types of complaints. A lot of times, people just don't like the fact that an RV is allowed to be on the property at all. So we get a lot of those. Then, of course, where the RV may be placed. Because years ago, when we started, especially this is an RV topic that I'm talking about now, years ago, we really made an effort to try to enforce the current code. And we were bombarded, council was bombarded, and so we were instructed, our zoning administrator was instructed to revisit that code. And so for the time being, as long as it was on the property, not in the front yard, front of the house, but if it was on the side yard or the driveway or the rear, basically our soft approach was technically it's a violation, but we're gonna leave it because people, when we told them you can't leave it on the driveway, so they would put it in the street. And because it's registered and insured, it was legal to be on the street, which would cause more safety issues than being on the property. So trying to give our zoning manager the opportunity to get language written that we could all agree that would be more appropriate for placement and parking of those vehicles so that we could present to council. They've obviously had to put that on the back burner because of many other pressing issues. So our enforcement of that has been just the way I've spoken. If they're on the property, not in the front yard, we're allowing it. And if they put it on the street, we've actually encouraged, if we've gotten complaints about narrow streets and it's a safety issue, we've encouraged them to put it on their driveway or on the side yard or, you know, on the side setback. And so we're still waiting, and it's kind of appropriate because I'm gonna be meeting with our zoning manager in the very, very near future on this exact issue, because it was already in the works, and she'd like to get something written and put to council and hopefully get adopted, because we are encouraging the fact that this should be allowed on their property.
So
Okay,
just to
well-
clarify, go ahead, Celia.
My question, Reggie, thank you so much for that explanation. I really appreciate it. I was actually asking about cars, not RVs. So I think there's a distinction, but I was curious to know if the inquiries you get from the public about parked cars are a result of people not understanding that the car is actually compliant. In other words, when we are asked if something should be changed, I'm trying to identify where the biggest complaints are coming from, and are they legitimate complaints, meaning is there a lot of non-compliance with the parked car issue?
Not for cars, except for on occasion when there's a house with 6 or 7 students living in it and they all have vehicles. Sometimes they get on the habit of trying to park it on the front lawn because there's not enough driveway or the garage or the side yard. And so we do get calls about those types of situations, and then we educate them as to where they are actually able to be.
Okay, so, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Is there any difference? I just want to clarify. Is there any difference between working on a classic car or totally disassembled, transmission out, abandonment? Is there any way to define that? You kind of covered it, Reggie. And then just to add, I threw in, you know, like a lawnmower and an appliance. Is this the right category for this? Or does it need to be absorbed into something else? If people have a thought on this.
Did you have another comment, Celia?
Oh, yeah, I actually was just curious about the RV, the current RV provision is the same as it's been for quite some time, because I think I remember when I was on, this issue came forward and it was commanded a lot of intention and energy, and I'm just wondering, has anything changed in the last 6 or 7 years?
No, we haven't changed that section of the zoning code. So there's a section on parking and again, this is all about operable vehicles, right? So I think on the discussion for today, and I opened up this can of worms, but we're really focusing on inoperable vehicles. But in terms of operable vehicles, the current zoning code for campers, RVs, boats, they're supposed to be parked in a garage or in a side or rear yard. So behind the front face of the home. They're technically not allowed in driveways per the code, but you can park it in the street between April and November. So a lot of times Reggie will say, if you move it into the street, you're in compliance, which makes no sense to the owner or the neighborhood, because then it becomes seen as a hazard. You want to protect your property. Keeping it in your driveway is safer than in the street, I think. So staff has taken the position we should allow these types of vehicles in driveways. There are people in the community who feel it detracts from property values. Because there's whatever the reason, they don't like it, have to look at an RV, there's too many toys. So we've worked on this over the years. It's still on the list. Tiffany's going to take it up here because there's several issues related to this. But for today, I think, yeah, we're trying to focus on inoperable and abandoned vehicles and repair of vehicles versus where licensed operable vehicles are parking. So we haven't changed it, Celia, we have not.
Okay, thank you for that, reminding me of the distinction that what you're focusing on today and what you're not focusing on today.
Just an update on enforcement. I had given everyone something that I had sent out, and the third one, 20% of the responses were there was concern about enforcement.
Yeah.
And you know, since we were talking about that, that's this piece, but it could be weeds, anything else, but enforcement. What's 6 out of 37?
Yeah. No, we're gonna try to spend a whole session on this, I think in July, on enforcement, so. It's a huge topic. Compliance, compliance, not enforcement.
Care and compliance.
Care and compliance.
Those are our general words.
What about this issue of, like Mark had said, we've put in equipment and appliances here. So Reggie, what part of the code right now, and like if somebody had a dishwasher sitting out in their front yard that wasn't working, what part of the code do you use to enforce removal
We
of
go
that?
with health and sanitation on that as well. Especially if it's something inoperable. And because, again, those technically, if they're not gonna utilize them, they should be removed. They're in the white pickup vans. So if they're on the yard, if they're on the driveway, we encourage them to move it back, you know, under some shelter or on the side yard, as opposed to the front setback. But
So that is the key to all of this, I think, is visible from the street. How do we want to define
And
it?
is that-
Where it's allowed and where it's
Yeah,
not?
that part of debris accumulation in a general term,
I-
or is it a different world, you think?
I think it's part of debris and accumulation.
Yep.
This equipment that's not functioning.
Right.
Yeah. It really is intended to be in a house, right? Like a dishwasher, obviously is not meant to be in a front yard. A lawnmower, that's a little tougher, I think. You leave your lawnmower out in the front yard? Do we care about that? I'm just curious.
They don't have any grass?
Doesn't matter.
But it could be art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We know that bathtubs and toilets are art.
I
so,
see.
yeah. That's the one I shy away from.
What I always love is you used to see this a lot in the Midwest. Field of long grass and a lawnmower that's just sitting there. It's like they were mowing and they just stopped for whatever reason and just walked away from it. So there's a lawnmower sitting there with half the yard mowed and it's like, did they just
They
decide to
gave-
take a break or
they
they
gave
ran
up.
out of gas or the
gave
lawns
up.
have been sitting there? Could have been weeds.
Gnats are good.
Go check Google Earth, see if it's how long it's been there.
You may have another comment.
Yes, you have another comment? Is it Celia?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Celia.
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, my hand was still up.
Yeah.
I'm kind of sensing, we don't have a large group here today, but I'm kind of sensing our current rules maybe are okay. I don't hear a lot of call for a lot of change. I'm not sure.
No.
Right?
And most of this, I think you said it earlier, most of this is covered.
Yeah.
But it may be covered in different sections. And sometimes the different sections may be a little bit contradictory to each other, so they need tweaking, so that they're the same. And maybe we just need to figure out how do we put them into one section so that we don't have all of these things scattered all over the place.
I think that's a great summary.
Yeah.
Anything else on this one? We've only got one more left, I think, for today.
So Dan, I
Recycle.
actually do have,
refuse. Yep, go ahead, Celia.
Dan, I'm sorry, there's a little delay here. So I think I agree with your sentiment, but where the challenge is gonna appear is in the political arena. And that's why I think the public education part, when it comes to this particular property care ordinance, is gonna be incredibly important to dispel myths that could take on a life of their own.
Right. Definitely. I mean, really, the intention this time out, I know we haven't had a lot of participation yet, but the intention is, yeah, to try to reach a wider audience before council meeting, right? That's never the first time you want to see a large audience is at the council meeting. You know, hopefully they've engaged us sooner. And so we're going to continue to just get the word out and try to get better participation between now and I would say September is our target date for a public meeting at City Hall.
Laura has a comment.
Go ahead, Laura.
I know that we have some regulations, but this is what we ran into last time. There was mayor neighbors at the time said, oh, we have all the regulations to cover all the issues. And, you know, that's really not the fact. So what I'm concerned about is that you guys will go, oh, mostly everything's covered, so maybe we really don't need this. And there are a lot of things that aren't covered, and we discovered that through Arrowhead, which still is quite scary to me, because if someone, threw a bud or something in there, I mean, it would go up. And with our dry climate right now, it's a pretty scary thought. So I just want to make sure that we're not going in that direction. I hope we're not anyway.
No, I mean, I think we need to, even though a lot of this is in the code, I think we need to, consolidate it and make it consistent. And so, when my comment wasn't intended to be, let's just leave everything exactly how it is. I think we just need to, maybe what I'm saying is the standards we have are hitting the mark, but we need to make sure it all works together, right? It is consistent.
Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be expanded a little more, is what I'm hearing from you, Laura.
That would be, yeah. Thank you. That's what I was saying.
And I'm gonna write down again, I'm just gonna sit here because I'm tired of writing when I'm standing, is your comment again about Arrowhead. And I'll work with Reggie on that one again. All right. The last one is containers and recycling. And again, we have stuff in our, I think it's chapter 7, about our solid waste program. And, you have to have one container for garbage and one container for recycling, and the city provides it. And there's things about the timing and all this, but, so some of it's in the code, but I'll turn it over to Mark about what we're trying to enhance it.
So the term that I put in there, the word adequate recycling and refuse containers. Each property shall provide adequate numbers of containers to accommodate materials without overloading and spillover. In the world of everybody ordering from Amazon, you've seen the cardboard flying out everywhere. This is mentioned a lot. Trash, containers, not putting them back in. So recycling, not overloading that. I put in required that the lid able to be closed and that you can wait for the next pickup. Same thing with the trash. And then we have that issue that we kind of talked about with bulk pickup schedule and how that, does that get into this world as well? Enforcement. So I don't understand why everybody overloads things like that. It's almost like a game. So if you have any thoughts on that, but trash and bins, as the British call them, rolly bins, that really is an issue that comes up a lot. So if you have any idea on this one, what would help? Does putting it into this ordinance help? Does leaving it alone? What is the issue? Do we zoom in on one thing that's problematic? Or do we just have the ability to, leave a nice note on, you caused a problem and you didn't pick up your trash after it was overloaded or it blew out when you did it? So.
If I can jump in and just provide some background on this, litter is a perennial issue in Flagstaff. We have been asked by city council to work on litter in Flagstaff. And we know that where a lot of our litter comes from is our own properties, right? And that relates to the work Reggie does every day, but it also relates to things like this, right? This is how litter gets into our community. And so we see this as a way to actually be proactive. We run litter cleanups. We run them as much as we can. We will give anybody supplies to do a litter cleanup, right? But we know we need to be proactive. And so that's just a little bit of background on why this is an important issue.
Is that knowledge good, that you do not overload and that you have the lid closed? Is that?
I don't think it works. The reason I don't think it works is you've got 12 guys that live in a house and they fill up that recycle bin. Okay, and now you're saying, well, what doesn't fit is gonna have to wait until next week. Well, I guarantee you before next week gets here, that thing's gonna be full again.
So the word may be adequate number of.
Potentially. The other thing that would really help was if recycling and trash got picked up on the same day. That would alleviate cans sitting out on the street all week long. They both went on the same day.
Celia has a comment.
Well,
Go ahead, Celia.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I really appreciate the problem of the litter. I mean, it's obviously a very, it's a long-standing problem. And I wonder if this isn't really a issue that we should focus on regulating, because I don't think it's going to work. And that the effort might go into public education. I know it's complicated. It's not that easy to get the message to the, in the case where there are tenants as opposed to owners or owner occupied. But maybe that's the place to focus, because what it says in the ordinance isn't going to really matter. Because I just think the problem is not, is the folks who are causing the problem are not necessarily ones that are aware that there are rules or are sensitive to the needs and wants of the people around them.
The other thing about overloading, it's like, for example, at my house, 90% of the time, we can't even fill up the recycling bin. The other 10% of the time, it's probably overloaded. Because, you accumulate stuff at different rates during the month. Sometimes, especially a perfect example is the holidays. So all of a sudden Christmas comes and kids come over and they empty their presents and everything goes in, and all of a sudden you could fill up 2 recycling bins, on that day. But the rest of the time you can barely fill up the one. So I think it's hard to gauge that issue because it's not something that happens for most families anyway. It's not something that happens all the time. Same thing with the trash containers. I mean, I know a lot of people do yard cleanups and they put their stuff in the trash. And on those days when they rake all their leaves and pine needles and stuff and put it in the trash instead of, because they're not getting bulky trash maybe for a month, so they put it in the trash. On that day, it's full. The rest of the time, maybe not so much. So I think it's difficult to regulate that issue.
is it something that you would be contacted by when it's overloaded and it has, dumped onto the street or has caused an issue with your
Yeah,
neighbor?
I always get back to, different people have different sense of personal responsibility. Like me, if I see that stuff, I just pick it up, I don't want it sitting out in my front yard.
We have
know,
heard that on a couple.
But I know that there are people who don't care, it gets dumped and pretty soon it's blowing all over the neighborhood.
My answer is yes.
You know,
Notify them.
yeah, well, I think.
Notify them, I understand,
I
I
agree.
completely understand at Christmas time and on special occasions that may happen. Probably shouldn't be notifying them, but you probably have people who regularly overload and have stuff dumped. Take special care to be notifying them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Education is a big piece of that. I think, from a landlord perspective, I think if we provided more diligent education materials so that they knew their responsibility as well being a tenant.
Yeah.
Really would improve.
Well, for those landlords, if they know they've got a regular problem because you've got 12 tenants and they're constantly overloading the recycling bin, maybe, they need to make arrangements to have another recycling bin dropped off, or whatever it happens
I
to
was gonna
be.
ask Reggie, because this comes up, how do we manage the situations when they consistently, don't have enough bins, they're overflowing? I think we do ask them to get additional bins.
We do, and one of the problems we see that causes this sometimes is they'll fill them up and then they'll forget to put them out during trash day. And so they have a whole nother week and they continue to add. And then they can't close the lid. Then the ravens and the crows come and spread it all over the neighborhood. Then the winds blow. And so in those situations, again, those are the times we have the ability where we say, you gotta have this picked up, you gotta get it out here, we'll bring them bags. Or then we'll call solid waste, hey, on your next run, can you run through here, empty this, because there's no way they can put anything else in it. At a charge to the property owner, or property owner, you know.
Sure.
Hands it down to the tenant. It's an issue. It's a huge issue, especially when you have an apartment with, 8 people, 6 people, 7 people, and only 2 containers.
Yep.
And then they have a party, and next thing you know, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
So we do request more containers. If they become a chronic problem, we have, or they leave the containers out all the time, we've actually requested the solid waste remove the containers. So then now it's their responsibility to find a way to get it to the landfill. That sometimes wakes them up quickly.
Do we have the ability to just find them, to just levy a?
There is that, but again, it's whoever purchased or is responsible for the container. So if it's a property owner and they're not there, and then we're finding them, they eventually get upset and then make the tenants put it in their name. So, it's a balancing act. Again, we've managed to find ways where we try to approach people, say, listen, we really don't want to find you, but if you continue this type of action, we will. Once we get to them like that, they usually do pretty good, then it's a whole new batch of tenants that come in, and we start all over again. The education is the key, and we do try to do that. Every year before move-in, there's been a program where we go through the neighborhoods, we pass out flyers, we talk about being a good neighbor. I know different departments through the city have gone into those neighboring properties, especially close to the university where there's a ton of students. So, I mean, those efforts could increase, could be better, didn't happen because of COVID. So, but I do expect those to kind of pick up again as we move forward. So, and this is part of, we want suggestions too on how we can actually make it better and do things. That's, I think, one of the reasons we're attempting to do this property care ordinance, but have the working group to be able to give us some suggestions, because we don't have all the answers.
Right.
Question number 2 in the survey. Now thinking about city as a whole, what are the biggest issues that you see related to property care? Trash, waste, 48%. Where's the respondents? As they rate it. So we have it, but we don't necessarily have the solution. So
And I think Laura, comment, she.
Yep. Go ahead, Laura.
Everybody's kind of said what I was gonna say, that, they'll need to get another bin or something. I mean, so we have that problem a lot because we have a lot of students in Plaza Vieja. So, I think that adequate bins is the answer. So I'm just repeating what other people said. So that's why I took my head down.
Or maybe earlier, my conversation, my suggestion that a roll-off be placed in neighborhoods, that a neighborhood lady suggested.
So when there's a property, Reggie, that consistently doesn't have enough bins, can we just ask solid waste to drop one off, or does the owner have to ask for it? Is there an additional fee when you have an extra bin?
It is.
You get an additional fee, which is why people don't want the extra bin, I'm sure.
Yeah, it all comes down to cost.
But can we just drop it off so that it's there, or do they have to ask for
They
it?
have to ask for it.
The owner has to ask for it.
And we encourage it, especially if there's the smaller containers where they've got 6 of them and yet there's still overflow. Now we request that they get a commercial type.
A dumpster.
A dumpster. And sometimes that works, but then the problem with that is once people see a dumpster, now people start illegally dumping into it. So it, again, starts to overflow again, and it's not always the tenant.
You gotta put a lock on it. The tenant doesn't have the lock combination.
It's an ongoing issue.
Yeah. All right, a lot of good comments on this one. I don't know, I'd be curious to know if we could require, instead of just asking for them to get more bins, if we could somehow require them to get more bins. I'm not sure what that looks like.
For the chronic overload.
Yeah. Not just the one time or a
Right.
couple times a
Yeah.
year, but yeah. The properties that we know just routinely are not managing it appropriately. Anything else on this
So
one?
Dan, Dan,
Go
this
ahead.
is Sue. Yeah, I actually think your idea is great and to explore whether it's possible to require, I don't know how you define a repeat offender, but maybe you define it so many complaints or something like that, and then something kicks in that mandates that they pay for another bin.
All right.
I think we should get, solid waste, like Dan Logan
Mhm.
involved in some of these discussions, because he could definitely address the legality of possibly doing that, or what he sees out there when he demands that they add another dumpster or a new container. So I think that would be appropriate to start bringing him in as well in this conversation.
And I think on, another thought is that as we approve, because, we're gonna start getting, probably more requests for higher density development over the next several years, is that, and we ask the developer to create a space where they can put the containers in. So we need to make sure that there is adequate space. So if this building needs 2 recycling bins or 2 trash bins or whatever it happens to be, that the space they create to host these is large enough to do that.
Daniel will be able to speak more to that. We are very limited in the state of Arizona for what we can require. We cannot require recycling. We probably can't require more space due to state legislation. So we're pretty limited in that. We do encourage it. Daniel and his team, as well as I review, developments as they go through. We encourage them to do dual enclosures, but we're very limited on what we can require.
But we do ask them to show where I'll call it the dumpster enclosure is, whether it's for garbage and recycling or not, but like on multifamily projects where we know they're gonna have a dumpster, that is a site plan requirement, because again, they want to make sure they can get their truck in and pick it up. And so
Right.
it is,
Well,
yeah, how much we can require is probably, yeah.
Well, I know, and this is where maybe it gets into a gray area, but, most of these projects typically require rezoning. Or a lot of them require rezoning. So if they require rezoning and you have a development agreement, then I think you can do a lot more things than what you would be required, what be allowed if it had the zoning. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we've had materials management plans, I think.
We do request a materials management plan.
And again, that's, I don't know if we do that on a standard site plan or
We
only
do.
when they need a entitlement. Like a rezon.
Any site plan is required to provide a materials management plan.
But we can't kind of set we can't tell them what has to be in the plan. We can just ask for the plan.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But
All right.
Okay.
We are so close to 3:00. I'm really proud of this group. You guys have all hung in there. I love it. We're going to keep trying to get a bigger turnout for these meetings. But you got through all 4 topics. Thank you so much. Any kind of closing comments for the group? Things you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to today? I'll just open it up for last few minutes. Go ahead, Rick.
Just one thought, it kind of goes back to what I said at the very beginning, trying to get other neighborhoods to participate in this. One of the challenges that we're gonna have, that I think we always have with these kinds of things is, a lot of neighborhoods are gonna look at this and say, well, this looks like a solution in search of a problem. And so we've got to somehow frame this thing differently so that it doesn't come across that way.
Which is one of the reasons we decided not to take the kind of off the shelf PMO, right? Let's write something for Flagstaff that is what we're trying to achieve out of it. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
Celia.
Go ahead, Celia.
So one of my thoughts about how to increase awareness of this process is to ask the staff liaisons to all the commissions to just announce that this committee is working on this, and maybe some of those folks might be interested in participating, especially anything related to land use, real estate, housing. Might find folks that way. And the other
Yeah,
thing,
it's a good-
yeah. And then, yeah, so that's the main one is social media, or social media, and then introducing this to all the commissions.
I will do that.
And the next door responses were great because you kind of know what, is the hell no, and you know that that's the reaction that you're going to have to educate on. And then you had people responding to that, they cared about things within their neighborhood. So it was a wild ride reading all of the stuff, but it's great that it went out there. So
And some people appreciated it. They said, I'm glad you're doing this, but no, I don't want an HOA. And that was kind of a mistake on my part. I
well,
said,
that was good,
an
actually.
odious HOA, we're not shooting for it. But that HOA stuck in people's minds.
Look at that face back there. That's not a, but I asked Reggie, I go, he does go to homeowners associations when they can't solve their problems. So it is citywide. So
Yes.
Yes.
Any other final comments? Anything on the line there, Reggie?
I don't see any right now.
All right, thank you, everybody, and
Thank you.
we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Okay,
all,
bye-bye.
appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Thank you, John, for coming.
Yeah, section 40.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, Very long time job, like on Rhode Island. They call it Rhode Island.